A cold wind whips through the Cumberland Gap, stirring dead leaves across abandoned trails where blood once soaked into virgin soil. In the dying light of the 18th century, as America stretched its infant limbs westward, two men carved a trail of horror across the frontier so profound that their names would echo through generations: Meticulously and Wiley Harpe, America's first documented serial killers. Picture a landscape barely touched by civilization, where the line between law and chaos was drawn in whispers and gunpowder. The frontier of 1799 was a place of new beginnings, where a man could reinvent himself or disappear entirely. It was also a place of tremendous violence, where the aftermath of the Revolutionary War had left deep scars and bitter resentments. Into this cauldron of possibility and danger stepped two men who would define a new kind of American nightmare. Their origins lie shrouded in the mists of history, though most accounts place their births in North Carolina, sons of Scottish immigrants. Meticulously, Big Harpe, and Wiley Little Harpe might not have been brothers at all, but cousins who found kinship in bloodlust. Some historians suggest their true surnames were Harpe, changed to Harper during their flight from justice. But what's in a name when actions speak with such terrible eloquence? Big Harpe was a giant of a man, standing over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and a face marked by scars and a perpetual scowl. Contemporaries described him as having the look of a wolf about to spring. Little Harpe was smaller, but perhaps more dangerous cunning, where his brother was brutal, with a disarming smile that masked murderous intent. Together, they formed a perfect storm of sociopathic tendency and predatory intelligence. The Revolutionary War shaped them, though not in ways that spoke of patriotism or principle. They sided with the British, joining Tory raiders who terrorized the North Carolina countryside. But even among these brutal men, the Harpes stood out for their cruelty. They didn't just kill. They seemed to revel in the suffering they inflicted. What experiences in those blood-soaked years transformed them from mere criminals into something far more terrifying? By 1797, the Harpes had moved west into Tennessee, bringing with them 3 women who they claimed as wives: Susan Roberts, Betsy Roberts, and Sally Rice. The nature of these relationships remains one of the most disturbing aspects of the Harpe saga. Were these women willing companions or captives? Contemporary accounts suggest a complex dynamic of Stockholm syndrome and survival instinct. They bore children to the Harpes, though few would survive their father's brutal nature. The brothers' early crimes in Tennessee set the pattern for what was to come. Travelers would go missing along the wilderness trails, their bodies later found mutilated and weighted with stones in rivers. The Harpes showed a particular savagery toward children that shocked even hardened frontiersmen. What drives men to extinguish the most innocent of lives? The brothers seemed to take special pleasure in destroying anything that represented hope or innocence. Their methods varied, but always exhibited excessive cruelty. Some victims were disemboweled and filled with stones before being thrown into rivers. Others were bashed against trees or simply hacked to pieces. The Harpes didn't kill for profit. Though they would take their victims' possessions, theft seemed almost an afterthought. They killed, as one contemporary put it, for the love of death itself. Consider the wilderness that sheltered their crimes. The frontier of 1799 was a place of dense forests, unmapped caves, and countless places where a body might never be found. The brothers utilized this landscape with terrifying efficiency, choosing remote trails for their ambushes and using the waterways to dispose of evidence. How many of their victims remain undiscovered, their bones still lying in the deep pools of frontier rivers? The authorities' pursuit of the Harpes reads like a dark adventure tale, full of near misses and brutal confrontations. Posses would form, track the killers through the wilderness, only to find themselves becoming potential victims. The brothers seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to evade capture, leading some to whisper about pacts with the devil. One of their most infamous crimes occurred at the cave, now known as Harpes Cave in Kentucky. They imprisoned several victims there, torturing them over days before finally ending their lives. The cave's remote location and labyrinthine interior made it a perfect lair for men who had seemingly abandoned all traces of humanity. Today, visitors to the cave report an oppressive atmosphere, as if the stones themselves remember the horrors they witnessed. The murder that finally turned the full force of frontier justice against them was particularly heinous. When their infant daughter's cries threatened to reveal their location to pursuers, Big Harpe silenced her in the most brutal way imaginable. Even their wives were horrified by this act. It represented a line crossed that seemed to shock even these women who had witnessed so many atrocities. The pursuit intensified. Moses Stegall, whose wife and child had fallen victim to the Harpes, led a posse with personal vengeance driving them. The hunt culminated in a dramatic chase through Kentucky wilderness. Big Harpe's horse was shot out from under him, and in his final moments, he reportedly confessed to 20 murders, though the true number was certainly higher. His head was severed and mounted on a tree at a crossroads as a warning to others, remaining there for years until time and weather finally erased this grim marker. Little Harpe escaped the posse, proving arguably more dangerous alone than he had been with his brother. He joined Samuel Mason's River Pirate Gang, operating along the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. But his nature couldn't be contained by even this brutal enterprise. In 1804, thinking to claim a reward, he and another outlaw killed Mason and tried to collect the bounty. Their scheme failed when they were recognized, leading to their arrest and eventual hanging. The women who had traveled with the Harpes eventually reintegrated into society, though their stories suggest deep psychological scars. Sally Rice remarried and lived until 1837, occasionally sharing heavily edited versions of her experiences with writers and historians. What stories did she take to her grave? What horrors were too terrible even for historical record? The Harpe brothers' reign of terror lasted only a few years, but it left an indelible mark on American frontier history. They represented something new and terrifying, killers who murdered not for gain or revenge, but for the sheer pleasure of it. In an era when most violence had some practical purpose, however brutal, the Harpes killed for reasons that their contemporaries couldn't comprehend. Their legacy influenced American law enforcement and frontier justice. Communities began organizing more formal posses and patrol systems. The need to track and capture such criminals helped establish more cooperative relationships between different jurisdictions. In a way, the Harpes helped shape the development of American law enforcement by showing how dangerous the alternative to civilization could be. The psychological profile of the Harpes continues to fascinate modern criminologists. They exhibited traits now associated with serial killers, childhood trauma, escalating violence, sexual dysfunction, and a complete lack of empathy. Yet they operated as a pair, which is extremely rare in serial killer cases. What dynamic between them enabled and perhaps amplified their savagery? Their story also provides a unique window into the social conditions of the American frontier. The Harpes operated in a time of tremendous change and uncertainty. The new nation was still finding its feet, and the frontier represented both opportunity and danger. The brothers exploited this transitional period, using the gaps between civilization and wilderness to their advantage. The landscapes they terrorized have changed dramatically, yet traces remain. Harpes Cave still gapes in the Kentucky wilderness. The Cumberland Gap though now traversed by highways, still holds its secrets. Places where bodies were found have been transformed into peaceful farmland or suburban developments. But the memory of what happened there lingers like a dark stain in local histories. Their story raises uncomfortable questions about human nature. Were the Harpes born evil, or did the violence of their era shape them into monsters? How thin is the veneer of civilization that separates us from such savagery? In an age when we think we understand serial killers through FBI profiles and psychological studies, the Harpes remind us that such darkness has always existed in the human heart. The mystery of their true body count remains. The confirmed victims number between 25 and 40, but given the vast wilderness in which they operated and the limited record-keeping of the era, the actual total may be much higher. How many families never learned the fate of loved ones who disappeared on frontier trails? How many bones lie undiscovered in the deep pools of Kentucky rivers? In the end, the Harpe brothers represent more than just America's first documented serial killers. They embody a particular moment in American history when the boundaries between civilization and savagery were still being drawn. Their legacy serves as a dark reminder that as we pushed westward, building our young nation, we carried with us the capacity for both tremendous progress and unfathomable evil.